Hi guys, this is Ashley with Ashley Says So, and I am back with another Weird Tale and Story format. I would like to put a disclaimer on these videos as well, and that disclaimer is to let you know that although the events of these stories are true, the details have been imagined. And when I say details, I'm speaking about the conversations that the parties had in the story, or the thoughts that the people had in the story, or things like that, things that I really could not possibly know, but I imagine the details in order to put this in a story format for you. But as I said, the events of the story are true, so sit back and enjoy the story. That poor lady just can't catch a break, the neighbors whispered amongst themselves as they watched the police walk into Mrs. Payne's house. They had pulled up quietly with no flashing lights. There was no need for them. The time for emergency had passed. The peeping eyes could only wonder what the news was this time. Whatever it was, they knew it wasn't good. Tragedy seemed to follow their dear neighbor, and they couldn't understand why. Celestine Payne was a very giving woman. Not only was she giving, she was kind. Her eyes were always full of warmth when she approached them. In fact, for many of them, she was even quick to lend a helping hand. But for all of her good works, for some reason, the bright rays of happiness just never seemed to smile down upon her. Oh, sure, she may have had happy times in the past, but you could be assured that following those brief periods of happiness, there were storms, and these storms were bigger than any hurricane. These were storms of complete devastation and tragedy. They were the kind that hit and left big gaping holes in your soul. Holes that could only be filled with grief and sadness. That was Mrs. Payne's life. But for each storm that approached, she'd weathered it and faced it head on with an ironclad armor of hope and strength. In fact, she was so strong that many attested that she was the strongest woman they knew, especially those whom had been in her life for a spell. These people in particular had seen her lose her father, they'd seen her lose her husband, they'd seen her go out of her mind when a dear friend that she'd invited into her home was stabbed. And now they wondered what they would see when the police had finished delivering the latest bit of what they suspected was grim news. Speaking of grim news, the officers at the Patterson, New Jersey Police Department were disheartened when the call came through. A jogger had been out for a morning run when he came across what he thought was a homeless person sleeping on the side of the road. At first, the jogger had a mind to mind his own business, but as he got closer to the sleeping bag, he thought it was quite funny the way the feet poked out on one end, but the head was fully covered at the other. I mean, maybe someone could sleep that way, he thought, but the more he looked upon the scene, the more it just didn't seem right. Sooner or later, as the spectacle grew more and more strange, the jogger decided that's it. He had to take a peek. If he went home without at least checking to see if the person was okay, it would bother him for the rest of his life. So he just had to take a peek into the bag. After he got his wits up, he walked over and on the count of 3, he yanked the cover up. And immediately, his hand covered his mouth and nose to stop what was surely a surge of bile and mucus. Inside of the bag was a girl instead of a man, and this girl's head was bashed to smithereens. Still struggling to keep from vomiting, the jogger hurriedly left the scene. He ran as fast as he could until he could reach a payphone and immediately dialed 911. That was about 6 months ago. Since then, the police had identified the young lady sleeping in the bag as Tara Carter. She was a young black female around 18 years old and had grown up in a tight-knit family. But at the time of her murder, she was living with her sister in a rented apartment. When the police broke the news to Tara's sister that she had been murdered, her sister was filled with anger and emotion, but she could not place anyone who would want her sister dead. Everyone loved Tara as far as she was concerned, and none loved her more than her adoptive mother, Mrs. Celestine Payne. As the sister described Tara and Mrs. Payne's relationship, the police started to feel the heavy weight of having to break the news to yet another loved one. You see, Celestine Payne's love for Tara went so deep that you would be forgiven for thinking that she was Celestine's daughter. In reality, not only was she not Celestine's real daughter, she wasn't even her adopted daughter. In fact, Tara and Celestine Payne had no blood relation at all. The truth of the matter was Tara had actually gone to high school and became fast friends with Celestine's daughter, Wendy. And it was through Wendy that Celestine met Tara and instantly fell in love with the witty young girl and gave her the title of daughter. Not only did she give Tara the title, she also gave the girl all the rights that came along with that title. And Celestine made it clear that Tara was to feel and be treated the exact same way her own daughter she had birthed was treated. And although Tara came from a close-knit family, at this time all of her family, excluding her sister, was in Georgia. And on top of that, she had sort of gone her own path anyway. So it felt good to have a mother figure in Celestine. It felt good to have someone who had her back and gave her the warmth and comfort that only a mother figure could give. In recent months, before Tara was found dead, she had actually moved in with Celestine and Wendy. She even had her own room. She and Wendy would spend almost all of their free time together, dating boys, going shopping, and just shooting the breeze like any other teen girls would do. Every time they left the house, Celestine would never fail to tell them how good they looked, give them a hug, and while they were gone, pray to keep herself from worrying that anything would happen to her two girls. And this is the information police carried with them to inform Mrs. Celestine Payne about the death of her extra daughter, and also to ask her when was the last time she'd seen Tara. Of course, they dreaded the last part. Nobody wanted to make a loved one feel like they were suspects, especially when they were as loving as Celestine was. But it was what it was, and they had to do their jobs. Uncomfortable is one of the words that could be used to describe Captain Frank Rabina as he sat being lashed with words from Celestine Payne. "No, I haven't seen Tara. I don't know what happened to her." "Yeah, my home was most likely the last place she seen. She lived here, didn't she?" "Oh my God, Tara is dead. Oh, no. How am I going to tell Wendy? You know her and my daughter Wendy, they were really close. They were like sisters." All of these words, these phrases, swept over Officer Rabina, leaving him with a red face. He dreaded looking into the face of this lady, half sympathizing with her and half accusing her of foul play. He hated the way her eyes, dark with circles, no doubt due to the many past tragedies in her life, flashed with hurt and a hint of anger, especially when he had to ask her accusatory questions. He almost felt this lead was a waste of time. Yes, Tara Carter lived with Mrs. Payne, but it's clear this lady loved this girl. She definitely wasn't the type to harm anybody. "Look here, Mr. Rabina. I ain't killed nobody, sir. I ain't done nothing. And I definitely ain't done nothing to Tara. That was my baby." But it was what she said next that raised Officer Rabina's eyebrow. "Sir, listen here. I've been faced with tragedy all my life. Everything I've had, almost everyone I've loved, truly loved, I've lost. The onlyest people who God have seen fit to leave for me here is my children. Oh, I'm just so thankful to still have my children. The children I birthed, you know what I mean. They the onlyest things that I've loved that haven't been taken from me." After she spoke her piece, Celestine wiped her eyes and looked into the face of the officer. Had he bought it? She wasn't sure, but it should have worked. After all, she wasn't lying about her children being the only folks in her life that wasn't taken from her. Well, taken from her maybe wasn't the right term, seeing as all of these taken folks weren't taken at all. They had been disposed of by Celestine with the help of her children that she loved oh so much. But was she wrong? I mean, she had to find a way to raise her children, a way to provide for herself and those children. These people were only stragglers in society anyway. They had nothing going on. Take her husband, for instance. He wasn't nothing but a low-down, good-for-nothing heck, he couldn't even provide. He was always sickly, always complaining. And it was only right Celestine kept his food good and poisoned to put him out of his misery. And after that happened, he was finally able to keep the promise that he made to her all those years ago. You know, the promise that he was a provider. Oh yes, he provided quite well after seeing that he was worth more dead than alive. Then you have Joe, the man she took into her home out of the kindness of her heart. She loved Joe like a brother, and it just pained her that he had to sleep outside alone on a cold winter night. Who the hell was she kidding? She couldn't give two shits about Joe. Honestly, he was nothing but a living, breathing paycheck, and Celestine still regretted the fact that he had lived through those stab wounds. Shoot, that was a cool $100,000 life policy gone to waste. Motherfucker was probably too drunk to even die. Now that leaves Tara. Now Tara was a quite different case. Celestine really did care for her, and when she invited her in her home, it was with good intentions. But over time, she just couldn't help it. Lord knows she tried, but she just started itching. She was just itching to take a life policy out on Tara. And she had actually hoped her daughter Wendy would stop her when she told her the plan. She'd hoped that Wendy would shout, "All right, Mama, now that's quite enough now. We've done this too many times. We can't keep on killing people." But instead, when she'd asked Wendy to impersonate Tara so they can get the life policy signed, Wendy jumped up to do it. She was excited to do it. Heifer probably needed some new shoes and a new wardrobe, Celestine said with a small huff of breath. "What was that?" Officer Robina asked. "Sir, huh? I beg your pardon, sir?" "I thought I heard you say something under your breath." "Oh, no, sir. I mean, I may have said something, but I just wondering what could happen to my Tara. Who did this?" Celestine said as tears started streaming from her face. "Oh, yes, ma'am, I understand, Officer Robina replied as he started packing up his things. As he looked in her face one last time, he thought to himself, Mrs. Celestine Payne was a broken woman. She wasn't no killer. He hated watching her shake as the sobs racked through her body. He did think it was quite strange when she mentioned she lost so many family members, but as he continued just to study her, shame started to form inside of him. Here was a lady that life had not been kind to. The creases in her face, greasy with sweat, bothered him. How many of those creases, those wrinkles, came from moments of grief? How many were there because this was a woman who had to face down struggle alone? Her life was just so full of sorrow, and now that was compounded by losing a girl whom she looked at like a daughter. No, he would not and he could not continue to question this lady. He wouldn't be the one to add stress to her life in an already unbearable time. He looked to his watch and fixed his mouth to call out for Officer Roberts and Officer Langdon. He wanted them to wrap up their search of this home. And that's when he heard it. "Looks like blood, Captain." Immediately, Celestine Payne shot up from her seat. "Blood? Blood in my own home? What blood? Where's this blood?" She couldn't even get the phrase out of her mouth before Officer Langdon ran up the stairs from the basement. "Did you hear me, Captain, sir? I said it looked like blood." "Yeah, I hear you," Captain Robina answered as he shot a questioning glance at Celestine Payne. "Lead me to it." On that day, blood was found down on the basement floor. Not only was it found on the floor, there were blood drips on the wall as well. In fact, once they followed the trail, it looked like the blood was coming from the ceiling. And when they went upstairs, they determined the location from the drip to be coming from Tara Carter's room closet. But it wasn't until they lifted the closet carpet that they saw the full horror of the blood stain. It was absolutely huge, and during a more thorough search, they also found big bits of skull down in the kitchen drain, and a small amount of brain matter in the toilet pipes. As all of this information came to light, Celestine Payne acted just as surprised as anyone. But soon the walls started closing in faster and faster. Within a few days, they'd found the wheels on her husband, Mr. Joe, whom was stabbed in her home, and Tara Carter. And the officers, wanting to tie up all loose ends, located Mr. Joe. He was found and he was questioned, and he informed officers that he had actually helped Miss Celestine Payne dispose of her husband's body. Then he added that one of Wendy's boyfriends had actually stabbed him while Celestine watched. He told Captain Robina that Celestine Payne and her children were evil, and they could very well be serial killers. In the end, all gathered evidence pointed to Mrs. Celestine Payne being the mastermind of a life insurance scheme in which she enlisted the help of her children to commit murder on the policyholders. When confronted with this information, Mrs. Celestine Payne had only one thing to say. "I'm just a woman who tragedy follows. I didn't do this. I didn't do any of this. Look at me, child. Look at me. Does it look like I would murder anybody?" Hey guys, this is the end of my story. Thank you so much for listening. I do want to inform you with other details. Tara Carter was beaten with a crowbar until she died, and she was beaten by a man named Charlie Pincham. And Charlie Pincham was Celestine's daughter's Wendy's boyfriend. Celestine Payne was present when that murder occurred, and she was the one that egged Charlie on to beat Tara to death. In the end, Celestine Payne and Robert Pincham got life in prison, and Wendy Payne received 28 years and was released in 2009. Thank you guys so much for listening to my story. I just want to put another reminder that although this story is true and the events did happen, that the details have been reimagined by me. So thank you guys again. I will see you on the next one. Bye.